Hello and welcome to the last module inside this course. We're going to be putting all the knowledge that we've learned about in-camera techniques, the hard work and effort we've put out in the field to capture these beautiful images. We're now going to give them the extra 10% they deserve through post-production. I'm going to be using Adobe Lightroom, but I'm going to keep it very generic. So whatever software you are using, you can follow along step by step with me. Now, also included inside this course are all the raw files that I'm going to be using inside this module. Some images that we've caught out in the field throughout this course, and some images that I previously captured from all around the world. Make sure to go ahead and download all those raw files so you can follow me step by step. But whenever I make an adjustment inside the slider room in Adobe Lightroom, just remember whatever software you are using to edit your images, it's basically going to do exactly the same result, no matter what software you are using. Let's get right into the first couple of lessons about learning our post-production softwares and how to go ahead and edit those images. Hello and welcome to this lesson where we're going to be having a general overview of what we expect to do inside of this module about learning post-production. We're going to jump straight into the computer now and look at Adobe Lightroom and some features inside this that you should understand. So the first one I want to make sure in any of our editing software is to import the raw images that we need to download. So inside Adobe Lightroom, we want to make sure down the bottom left-hand corner, we click Import. And now we want to go and find the source folder that we've downloaded these raw files that are included inside this course. Now for me, it's just under landscape course, but I've already imported these images. So this would show up with a little tick box at the top corner, and we want to make sure to import that image. In Adobe Lightroom, you're going to see on the left-hand side all the images that we can expect to go through and edit inside this module, also numbered. Now just a quick overview, at the top here we've got a panel, and also on the left hand side and right hand side we've got panels. The top panel is the major panels we want to look at, so library, develop module, maps. Inside this course we're going to look at just the library and just the develop module. So a library is basically a booklet that we can go through and keep all our images saved, and if we had 2, 3, 4,000 images to edit through here, they would be found all in here. Now also you can see I've got a main folder here, and these are called subfolders. Now I can go through and make a secondary subfolder inside of this. So I can just click this image, there's a little plus arrow just here, I can click on that and it's going to say add subfolder. And we can just write here, new subfolder, and you're going to see once I create that, it's going to drop down under the exposed to the right. So we can go through and make this very broad, and I've got this for all the countries I've traveled to, and also you can go through lenses or whatever you need to go through here. It's a very good module inside of Adobe Lightroom, and this is why I highly love Adobe Lightroom. On the right hand side here, it goes through all the information, what we call metadata. Metadata is basically simply known as the information stored inside of the camera. So we can go here through and capture date, capture time, dimensions, so the pixels of the image, the focal length, the exposure, aperture. This is a really good information, and I recommend not to delete any images, because the best thing about post-production software is we've got the histogram, which we're going to talk about in a separate lesson inside this module. But once we make a mistake inside of out in the field capturing the image, when we get into post-production, we want to keep this, because if this wasn't exposed to the right enough as we spoke about inside this course, we could go through here and see the exposure might be 5 seconds, and you know next time that you have to increase the exposure for your camera. So you're going to learn a lot about your camera out in the field, because if you get a new camera or you've just updated to a new camera, every camera is completely different. Even inside, so I use the Fujifilm, and when I upgraded to the next model in Fujifilm, it was completely different as far as dynamic range. So please don't delete images. I recommend to have a folder where you can go through and understand where you've made those mistakes. So you can call the folder underexposed, save the images in there, and revisit it after a few times and just see what mistakes you are making. And what you're going to do with that is consistently see the mistakes that you're making. This is why I love post-production. It's a really good way to learn what your camera can do out in the field, capture those images, but most importantly to take them home and edit them the exact way you want. Just some more advanced features in Adobe Lightroom. Down the bottom panel here, still in the library module, we've got a grid view where we can see all the images inside of this photo. Then once we click on the folder, it's just going to show you inside that folder. This one is just the loop view, so a bigger screen. This is a comparison which we will get into inside of this course, which is a really good way to compare old images to new images. But just inside this grid view, this is only for Adobe Lightroom, but we can go through into this metadata right now. And what you can do is sort out images that are taken with certain lenses. So if you go away for a 2-week, 3-week trip and you take 3 lenses away and you want to find what lenses you are most using, we can see here, XF 10 to 24mm, so my wide angle lens, I've used the most in here. But if I click on that, it's just going to show me those images for that particular lens, which is a really good way to break down and see what you are using also once again. Once again, this is perfect if you have 2,000-3,000 images because you're going to have a bigger pool of images here. You can also go through attributes. Attributes are down here. You can give it a flag rating, a star rating, or a color rating. So what we could do here, if we have an exposure bracket image, which we're going to have right here, this is an exposure bracket which we learned inside of this course. I could give this one a red, this one a red, and also this one a yellow maybe. And what I'm going to do is just go through into the attributes, and I can just go up here and just select color. And now it's just going to show me those 2 red images. Once again, a really cool way if you've got obviously hundreds, if not thousands of images to sort through. You can simply just get rid of that by going down and toggling off. So this is just for Adobe Lightroom, what I'm showing you right now. There are other features in different software, but I highly recommend if you are using Adobe Lightroom to go through this when you first import your images, because it's going to make your life so much easier. But now I want to move on to the next 2 lessons where I want to break down global adjustments versus local adjustments. This is very important, and this is where we're finally getting into understanding what we can do out in the field to bring it home into post-production to get the most out of our landscape images. In this lesson, we're going to have a basic overview of global adjustments. This is going to be a very generic overview because whatever post-production software you are using, this will be exactly the same as far as highlights, shadows, and all those sliders inside the Develop module in Adobe Lightroom. So jumping into our post-production software, we want to make sure to click on 1 and 2, Introduction to Lightroom. From here, we want to go into your Develop module, whatever that will be for your particular software. What we're going to see at the top here is the histogram. Under the histogram, it's going to give you the ISO, so 200, the focal range, 15.1mm, the aperture, and also the shutter speed. Once again, this is a very good reference to understand if you've made mistakes or you need to improve on certain things, understanding your camera better. This top panel here is what we call local adjustments. We're going to go through that on the next lesson because this is the most powerful feature inside of editing software, and we need to completely understand that. But before we get to the local adjustments, we need to understand global adjustments. Now, I was talking about shooting in RAW versus JPEG. The big main reason behind that was obviously color space, but also this WB here means white balance. So you can see right now as shot. If I drop this down, it's got presets made, so auto, daylight, cloudy, shade, tungsten, fluorescent, flash, and custom. I can go through right now and just change this to be daylight, cloudy, and this is all presets made. And after you understand these presets, you can set them obviously in camera also, but I guarantee you it's not always going to be the perfect situation out in the field. So we can click automatic, which I generally like to do to see what the image does. Now for me, I got this pretty close in camera because there's not a lot of colors going around for me. But there's one thing we have to understand about post-production software. It is non-destructive. I must say that once more time. It is non-destructive. So whatever we do right now, if we don't like it in 5 minutes time or 10 minutes time, even 2 years time, we can come back and make changes, whether it's global and local adjustments, which we're going to go through on the next lesson. We can always make changes. So don't stress too much. If you don't like something, halfway through, we can just jump back up and make small changes instantly. So therefore, I want to keep it on auto or daylight. So for me, daylight looks pretty good there. It's punching out all these greens in the background. Now for the exposure, we want to read this histogram. Remember, left blacks, shadows, exposure, highlights and white. So we can see we're just missing here a little bit on the white. So I'm just going to bump up this exposure a little bit, and you can see I can double click on exposure and it's going to reset that value. But watch what I do when I move it to the right hand side. Look how the histogram almost comes to life just that little bit more. So that's what I'm going to do, just leave it at 0.30 and leave it there. So exposure is the same as increasing the ISO in camera, or basically decreasing the shutter speed. So reducing the shutter speed is obviously going to let more light into the camera, or we can drop the aperture value. So all that information we learned out in the field. So obviously if we reduce the aperture number to f8, it's going to let more light into the image. But we can always make small adjustments inside of post-production. Now, if this had to be like, say, 1.5 or something around this 1 value, we know we've made a big mistake out in the field. We haven't got enough information. But when you can keep it around that 0.25 to 0.3 area, it's really, really good. But just remember, this exposure value will increase the noise in the overall image. We've got to be really careful about this. The contrast is going to affect the highlights and shadows in the overall image. So the overall image is going to be affected here. So if I bump up this contrast, you can see. So don't look at the image too much. What we're trying to concentrate a lot on is the histogram. The same as I explained out in the field. We don't want to rely on the obviously LCD screen on the camera or here our computer screen. We want to get so much information from the histogram. So basically what I'm going to show you right now is when I increase this histogram, it's going to go on the right hand side and left hand side, and it's going to stretch the histogram because we're adding more whites and more blacks to the image. So left and right, you can see it stretching it right at that value. What I like to do with contrast is actually leave this all the way to the end. So I make this right at the end. What I'm going to do now is just reduce the highlights just a little bit. So around that 50 value, just pushing this away, and we're just going to introduce some of those whites to look after the histogram a bit better. Shadows, I'm actually going to introduce shadows not so much, and then really try and crush this black value. So you can see right now there's not a lot of black. When I just remove that, there's so much black in the image. We have to be really careful. I'm actually going to either hit the J key, or I'm going to toggle this on the top here, and this is called clipping. Clipping is basically showing you this value here where we've lost information. So if I just get the white value, it's going to come up red somewhere on, see how it's come up red? This is clipping in the whites. Dark blue is clipping in the blacks. So we want to go back and make sure we're not clipping any areas. You can see we're just clipping in here. The blacks I'm not too worried about because it's so dark in there anyway. I'm just going to turn this off, reset the black value. See how it's really dark anyway back there? It's actually it's already clipping there anyway, so don't have to stress too much about this. So sometimes we want to look at the personal taste and what we like. So I'm going to roll back the whites just a little bit, and there I'm going to be done for there. Texture is going to introduce, so I'm going to bump up this to 200% and go to this rock here. Just want to show you what texture is going to do. It's really going to chisel out all this information, but I don't want to add texture right now because I want to go through and add sharpness. So texture is only going to add sharpness to where the midtones are. So the midtones are basically in between the whites and shadows and a grey area. I'm going to explain that to you a little bit later. It's going to reset that value. Now clarity is very similar to contrast, but contrast affects the overall image. So highlights, shadows, blacks, whites, everything, okay? Clarity is only affecting the midtones. So I'm just going to bump this up and show you. So there's 83. Now I'm going to get clarity and bump this up also. And you can see how it's basically hasn't done the same as contrast because it's only affecting the midtones in the image. We really want to make sure we don't want to go too strong on any of these because it's going to affect the overall image and it's going to introduce noise. So texture clarity I'm going to come back to later on. Now dehaze is very similar to a polarizer. Okay, so if we introduce, I'm going to push J to get rid of that clipping. If we introduce all this dehaze, you can see it's really popping out all this color. We don't want to go too far, remember, because when we introduce too much dehaze, it's obviously going to introduce noise into the image, which we work so hard out in the field to try and limit the amount of noise. So I like to play around this around the 12 value. So around that 12 value is good for me. Now I want to come back up to this exposure. It's a little bit too strong for me. So I'm going to go back to 0.2, and then I'm going to roll back the shadows just a little bit. Remember, we still have to introduce this contrast later on. Vibrance and saturation is another one that I come back to extremely late. So we can make late adjustments after we make local adjustments. Scrolling down to tone curves. Okay, so we've got highlights, lights, darks, shadows once again. Now, we've got up here highlights, shadows, whites, blacks. Very, very similar to what we're seeing here. So what is the difference? Highlights, shadows, whites, black here is making a mask. So this is being masked in the image of where Lightroom thinks the highlights are. Okay, so just to repeat that once again, for each bit of this slider, highlights are being masked where Lightroom thinks there are shadows. But when we go down to this tone curve, this is highlights over the whole image. Okay, so this is being over the whole image. So basically we're making minor adjustments now to just where the highlights are. Once again, I can go through and show you the lights. See, it's not affecting this back area right now because it's only affecting the lights over the overall image. Once again, we can go through shadows. You can see it's only affecting certain areas. So more local adjustments inside of the global adjustment. So this is affecting the overall image, everything. And as we get further along down, it's going to make smaller and smaller adjustments. Now, I highly recommend to follow this down the panel. There's one exception for that. I'm going to show you that a little bit later on. So from here, we want to make smaller adjustments once again. So we can go through and make small adjustments once again, reading that histogram, because that is the most important thing here, and going through and just understanding where to go on this. So I'm not obviously going through and editing this perfectly. I'm just showing you what the highlights are doing to the overall image. Okay, so you can see just certain areas. So I want to go back. There's a trick inside of Lightroom. You can hold down Alt and you're going to see this change here. We can go to reset region. Okay, so let's just go back and make some values here. We want to keep going on to the next one. There's hue, saturation, and luminance. This is a very powerful feature inside of post-production. Hue. We're going to start and separate these panels here. Hue, okay? So we're going to go through and I'm going to show you, let's try this, we can go with the watercolor, so this aqua color. So right now, this is made up of numerous colors. We've got aqua on the side here. I can make it more green or I can make it more blue. So you can see this little area being affected down here. Let's go up to 100% so it's a little bit easier to see. Right, so you can see massive adjustments being made. We're going to reset this, and now I'm going to click this little toggle up here, and I'm going to go on to the same area, but before we just affected the aqua. But you watch now, when I click and hold down and drag it down and up, you can now see that this color is actually made of aqua and blue. So it's getting a percentage of aqua and a percentage of blue, because before we just affected aqua. But now you can see this color is made up of multiple colors. So therefore we can go and do the same thing here. So orange, I can boost this up to orange and you can see that the floor here is changing red. So we can just go through and double click that to reset it. And now when I toggle this on and off, you can see there is a little bit of red inside of this also. So we want to make sure we're affecting all those images. This is basically all those colors, sorry. So this is basically just manipulating one color to another color if we wanted to do that. So we can go up here once again. I can tell in here there's green and a little bit of yellow. So we can go through and see green and yellow are being affected now. So that's very, very important. Once again, we want to make small changes. I'm just going a little bit drastic here to show you this. Now, saturation and luminance are quite similar, so I want to explain to you the difference here. We're going to stay on this green once again, and we quickly know that we don't want to just affect the green, because we found out before that this grass here on the rock is also green and yellow. So once again, we can click on this toggle and go up and down. So you can see here, saturation is affecting the amount of saturated or vibrance color inside the image. So how much color identification is inside of that color. So as I said to you before, yellow and green, we've got percentage. So it's also adding a percentage of vibrance into that image. So basically how colorful the color is. But if I hold down Alt once again, reset those values and go into luminance. Now luminance is basically how much light is in the color. So when I click on this now and go to the grass, you can see it's basically going to introduce brightness, darkness, brightness, okay? So this is basically how much light. So luminance, the same is light, how light is measured. Saturation, how much color percentage is inside of the color. Hue, manipulating one color to another color, okay? So we can go through here and separate it by color. So we can just look at red, which is basically exactly the same as the hue saturation, but it's broken down left to right here, where here it's broken down color, top to bottom. So exactly the same results out of both of this. Split toning, one of the most powerful features, one of two powerful features inside of Lightroom. Here we can go through, if you're ever stuck inside of Adobe Lightroom, you can hold down Alt and you can go through and basically use it on each slider, and you're going to see it change the whole perspective of the color. So it's introducing color. But first of all, I want to explain to you what is split toning. We've got highlights here, we've got shadows, we've got hue saturation for shadows. We learned that we can manipulate color with hue, so one color to another color. Saturation is how much vibrance or percentage of color is inside of the color. So here I can go through, I do it a little bit differently. I set my saturation value to 20, which is way too bright. But now I want to hold down the hue and drag it along until I find a color that looks natural in the image. So around this blue color looks most natural to me, so 225. And after a lot of trial and error experience, years of post-production, you understand that color actually has a value, so a number value. So for me right now, I know 50 is the value for yellow, 65 is the value for green, but you'll learn this after editing time and time again. So I want to bring this down to number 8. I'm just going to toggle this off and on. So you can see in the rock here, this area just here. If I toggle this off, it's quite yellow, quite a neutral color. When I toggle this on, it gives it a cooler tone, which I want to match the color of the water. It's a very famous color water in Slovenia, and I want to match that color. But remember, this is just the shadows. When we check the highlights, the affected area up here, we can make it a different color now. So I can go through and I can add in this yellow green I was telling you about. So 65 is the value of green. So we can go through and give that an 8. You can see now, just this little minute area here, if I toggle off and on, it hasn't added a lot, but I can guarantee you it's added enough to stand out, especially when you print that image. Because remember, our overall goal when we take an image is to hang it on the wall and be extremely happy with it. Moving on down to details. Details is also known as sharpening and luminance. Automatically set to 40. I always drag this off. I don't like sharpening at 40. I like making my own sharpening, even if it comes back to the value of 40. What I like to do right now is basically hold down Alt and look here. So remember this value. 0% is white, 100% is black, 50% is gray. The reason I explain that is inside of this value just here. So if I hold down Alt once again, on the top left where those trees are, it's very green. It's almost black, so it's very dark. That means it's not going to be affected to this area. But on the rocks down the bottom left-hand corner, it's white. That means it's going to be affected. So anything black is not going to be affected. Anything white is going to be affected, because remember, black is 100%. Then white is 0%. So I'm going to show you right now what I mean by this. I want to punch up to 100%, even 200%. Let's go 200%. So we can get a full understanding of what we can see here. So I want to go to the bridge. This is my main focal point, and I want to go to a value of around 35. Let's stick with 35. Now this masking down the bottom here, this is going to be a mask. This is what I was talking about before with the highlights, shadows, lights, and darks. Once again, if I hold down Alt and slide up mask, right now, 0% is white, so everything right now is being affected. But when I drag this up, you're going to see the image change. And remember, everything black is not being affected. So if we had the sky, this is going to make more sense later down the track. When we have a sky, we don't want it to be sharp, so we want to reduce the amount of sharpening. We do this through masking. So right now I'm holding down Alt, holding down the left trigger on my mouse and sliding this all the way along to just get what I want to be sharpened. So white is being sharpened, black is not being sharpened. So moving on, we're going to do the same with luminance, same with noise reduction, all here, okay? So we're going to look at this when we just edit the image. Moving on further down, this is basically something we would do when we first originally import these images. I'm using Fujifilm cameras, so I have my profile correction inbuilt into my camera and lenses. But if you're not using Fujifilm, you need to come down here and go Enable Profile Corrections. And here we want to find the brand that you're using. So these are all presets you can see from Google, GoPro, DxO. You can see everything here. So let's try mine. Fujifilm, they probably won't have my camera. No, see, none of my cameras here. So we're just going to leave this as per normal. So I'm actually going to untick this and go back from there. I don't want to introduce this model Fujifilm because it's not correct. So make sure to go through it and find if you use a Canon, 80D, whatever it is, you want to go through there and do that. That is pretty much us done for the global adjustments. We can go through here and basically this is going to align our images on the X, Y, Z. This is a little bit more advanced, and right now I don't need to do it because we haven't got a horizon line. So I'm going to leave this for a later date. We can just click auto and see what it does. It's not going to do a lot because there's nothing unnatural in the image. So that is pretty much us done for global adjustments. We can come back and make contrast adjustments, but I want to do this actually after I do local adjustments. Okay, so we're going to get back to this, and especially when we edit the overall image, contrast, clarity, vibrance, and saturation. We're going to get back to this on a later part. But you can see, going through the global adjustments, how we can manipulate the image out in the field. So once we understand what our camera is capable of, we can go through and take images out in the field. But it hasn't stopped there. When we go into the next lesson, we're going to learn about local adjustments, where we can basically make small, minor adjustments to the overall image. And once we get out in the field, we can know the particular style that we want to create in post-production. It's a very powerful feature. Let's get right into the next lesson about local adjustments.